Ma'am, I'm calling 911. That child shouldn't be in there. The shrill voice echoed through the marble corridors of the courthouse like a siren cutting through calm. Heads turned. A sharp clatter followed. The sound of a wheelchair's metal rim brushing against the tiled wall as the little girl inside flinched, startled by the sudden eruption. Her mother froze for a moment, torn between shielding her daughter and confronting the voice that had just turned their quiet, ordinary day into a public spectacle. "She's just using the bathroom," the mother said, her voice trembling with restraint, her hands gently gripping the wheelchair's handles. But the woman, mid-40s, stiff blazer, the kind of entitlement that walks like authority, raised her phone higher and pressed it to her ear. "I'm at the county courthouse. There's a disturbance." She spoke into it, eyes locked on the child like she was witnessing a crime. Yes, a child. In a wheelchair. Using the accessible bathroom. I don't think she's supposed to be in there. The corridor held its breath. A man waiting on a bench looked up from his file, confused. A court officer stepped forward cautiously. The little girl, maybe 8 or 9, sat quietly in her chair, her breathing shallow, lips pressed tight, eyes glassy. Her legs dangled, thin and motionless, her fingers curled into the sides of the seat. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" she whispered. The mother knelt down beside her, brushing away a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong." But her voice was cracking. The Karen, for there was no better name for this woman now, turned sharply to the nearest security guard. "Don't you people have rules? This is a government building, not a public playground. They can't just use any facility they like." The guard hesitated. He didn't quite know what he was walking into, but the child looked small, the mother looked cornered, and the caller looked certain. It was the kind of scene that sparks wildfire, a mix of confusion, authority, race, disability, and a misplaced sense of order, all colliding in a courthouse hallway over something as basic as human as the right to use a restroom. No one noticed the judge step out of his chambers just yet, but he had heard everything, and what happened next would shake more than just the silence of the building. The day had started like any other hopeful morning, with light peeking through the blinds, dancing across the kitchen counter as the scent of cinnamon oatmeal filled the small but cozy apartment. For Melissa, mornings like this were sacred. She moved through the kitchen in soft slippers, her robe trailing behind her, humming an old gospel tune her mother used to sing. At the table sat her daughter, Nia, 8 years old, bright-eyed, with skin the color of toasted almonds and curly hair pulled into 2 neat puffs. She was carefully coloring the inside of a birthday card, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth in focused determination. Nia had always been like that, patient, gentle, endlessly creative. Her wheelchair was just another part of the morning routine now, as normal as brushing teeth or tying shoelaces. She was born with spina bifida, and while the early years had been tough surgeries, hospital visits, therapy, she had grown into her own light. There was something in the way she saw the world. As if pain had taught her compassion early, as if limitations had only sharpened her imagination. She didn't complain. She didn't pity herself. She just lived fully, sweetly, and bravely. Melissa poured Nia's juice and sat across from her, her mind fluttering with the day's schedule. Today was important. It wasn't just any courthouse visit. They were finalizing the petition to enroll Nia in a special education program that would finally give her access to a more inclusive classroom environment. Melissa had fought hard for it. Letters, meetings, forms, it had taken months. But she never minded the work. She just wanted her daughter to feel seen, heard, and supported. Today felt like a small victory, a moment of progress, a turning point. Nia looked up and smiled. "Can I wear the purple dress today?" she asked. Melissa grinned. "Only if I can wear my lucky earrings." By 9 a.m., they were dressed and ready. The sun was gentle that morning, not too harsh, casting long golden beams across the city sidewalk as Melissa pushed Nia's chair toward the courthouse steps. They laughed along the way, Nia pointing out a pigeon that looked like it was limping just like me on wheels, and Melissa gasping in mock outrage. "Nia, that pigeon's gonna file a lawsuit." The two of them burst into laughter. These were their moments, private jokes, shared strength, a bond forged through struggle but polished by love. At the courthouse entrance, a guard smiled and held the door open. "Morning, ladies," he said. "Morning." Nia chirped, waving. They made their way past the security check, where Melissa gently lifted Nia's school bag off the chair to scan it separately. The clerk behind the counter looked up and nodded, offering a warm, familiar smile. Melissa had been here before. She knew her way around now. Everything about the place felt formal but manageable. The tiled floors echoed lightly beneath the wheels. The hallways smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant. The elevator chimed softly as they rode to the second floor. As they exited, Melissa paused for a moment to orient herself. That's when Nia tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, I gotta go." "Bathroom?" Melissa asked. Nia nodded, already blushing. Melissa smiled and leaned in. "That's okay, sweetheart. Let's find the one with the blue sign." She meant the accessible restroom, of course, the one Nia could enter independently. They'd practiced this many times. How to open the door with the automatic button, how to lock it from the inside, how to transfer to the seat and back again. Nia was proud of her independence, and Melissa encouraged it in every way she could. As they approached the restroom area, Melissa saw the familiar sign and gently pushed the button. The door opened with a mechanical whoosh. "I'll be right out here," she said, kneeling to whisper. "I know," Nia said with a smile. "You always are." And then, for a fleeting moment, everything was calm. Melissa stood near a bench by the wall, scrolling through her emails, double-checking that she had all her documents for the meeting. The faint sound of water running behind the door, the ticking of her watch, the quiet buzz of the hallway, it all felt normal, like just another step in a long journey toward justice, dignity, and equity for her child. She didn't notice the woman at first, the one watching from across the hallway, the one whose purse was clutched tightly to her side, whose eyes narrowed at the restroom door as if it concealed something forbidden. Melissa didn't notice the way the woman stepped closer, phone in hand, mouth tightening. She had no reason to. This was just a courthouse, and her daughter was just using the bathroom. But in moments like these, peaceful, honest, and unguarded, the world sometimes reminds you how fragile progress can be, how quickly a smile can turn into a defense, how easily a regular morning can become a headline. Melissa didn't know it yet, but the next words she would hear would shatter the calm. And once again, she would be forced to defend her daughter's right to simply exist. The hallway was quiet, almost serene, with only the occasional shuffle of shoes or the echo of a distant conversation. Melissa stood by the wall, scrolling through her phone, a little smile still lingering on her lips from Nia's earlier joke about the limping pigeon. She glanced at the file folder tucked under her arm. Everything was in order. A few minutes more, and they'd be at the clerk's office to submit the documents. It felt like a good day. Then a shift in the air. It wasn't loud. Not at first. Just a sound, the tap of heels slowing as they approached, the quiet sort of pause that isn't loud in volume but heavy in presence. Melissa looked up. The woman was standing maybe 10 feet away, early 40s, professional. Her beige trench coat hung stiffly over a tailored skirt suit. She had the look of someone who knew how to own a room with her silence. Her eyes, sharp and inspecting, were fixed not on Melissa, but on the bathroom door. Her lips pursed, not in anger, but in restrained disapproval, the kind that pretends to be polite while saying everything you need to hear. Melissa offered a gentle nod. The woman didn't return it. Instead, the woman tilted her head slightly, as if she were puzzling through something complex. Her gaze dropped to the wheelchair parked inside the accessible stall, just barely visible through the small gap under the door. Then back to Melissa. Her expression hardened, a flicker of something close to contempt in her eyes. She took a slow step forward and cleared her throat, deliberately loud. Melissa straightened. "Is there something I can help you with?" The woman's voice was clipped, precise. "Is that your daughter in there?" Melissa blinked, unsure how to respond. Yes, she just needed a minute. A beat of silence. Then, those bathrooms aren't for everyone. They're for people who need them. Melissa narrowed her eyes. She does need it. She's in a wheelchair. The woman's gaze flicked again toward the door. "Well, it's just, I've seen a lot of people pretend these days. You know how it is. Some parents do the whole sympathy act just to get better treatment. Melissa felt something cold crawl up her spine. Excuse me? The woman held up a hand. I'm just saying I work in this building. I see people taking advantage of systems all the time. I have a nephew in a wheelchair. Real disability is different. And there it was. The first crack in the morning's piece. Melissa took a breath. My daughter has spina bifida. She has every right to that restroom. The woman looked unconvinced. If you say so. Then she pulled out her phone. At first, Melissa didn't think much of it. Maybe she was texting, maybe checking email. She didn't expect what came next. The woman stepped slightly away, then raised the phone to her ear. Melissa heard it, the telltale tone of a call being placed. She turned, heart thudding. Wait, are you calling someone? The woman spoke quietly but deliberately, turning her back just enough to shield her face. Yes, I need to report something. Melissa took a step closer. You're calling the police? For what? I believe someone is misusing state facilities. A child is inside the courthouse restroom, and she's a disabled child. The woman's voice rose slightly, still professional but edged with smugness. Well, that's not for me to determine. It's better if someone comes and sorts it out. The words hit Melissa like a slap. The fury, the disbelief, the humiliation, they all swirled inside her at once, but she stayed rooted. Her instincts told her not to explode. Not here. Not in this building. Not while her child was on the other side of that door. A few people down the hallway were starting to take notice. A man glanced up from his briefcase. A clerk leaned slightly around the corner. Whispers began to bloom like weeds. Melissa looked toward the bathroom door. Nia, she called gently, trying to keep her voice even. You okay, baby? I'm almost done, came the soft reply from inside. Is something wrong? Melissa's throat tightened. No, sweetie. Everything's okay. But it wasn't. It had taken just 60 seconds for a stranger's gaze to turn into suspicion, for suspicion to morph into accusation, and now into an official report. Melissa clenched her fists. The woman was still on the phone, speaking calmly, methodically, as if calling in a parking violation, not disrupting the morning of a mother and a child who had done nothing more than use the restroom designed for them. The peace was gone. The tension was thick now, in the air, in Melissa's chest, in the echoes of every step in the hallway. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet, burning voice whispered the truth. This wasn't about a bathroom. This was about something much uglier. Melissa could feel her palms sweating as she stood there, every second stretching like hours. The woman, now fully assuming the posture of someone in charge, lowered her phone, seemingly satisfied that she'd made her point. But it wasn't over. Not even close. She turned back toward Melissa with a tight, rehearsed smile. She began as if beginning a polite conversation. This entire building has a protocol, rules, structure, things we follow for a reason. Melissa raised an eyebrow, biting the inside of her cheek to suppress the rising storm. And how does that apply to my daughter using a bathroom marked accessible? The woman gave a short, humorless laugh. It's not just about signs. It's about respecting spaces, following procedures. There's a process to access certain facilities in government buildings. You can't just wander in like it's a bus station. Melissa's eyes darkened. We didn't wander in. We have business here. My daughter is disabled. She used the only bathroom she can. She didn't break a rule. You did by assuming she didn't belong. Oh, please, the woman scoffed, flicking a hand dismissively. Everything is about identity now. Race, disability, trauma. It's always some excuse. You people are quick to pull those cards when someone asks a simple question. You people. The words hit Melissa like an open-handed slap. This woman had gone from whispering doubt to declaring judgment in full view of the hallway. She now stood between Melissa and the bathroom door, arms folded, chin lifted slightly, not unlike a self-appointed guard, not courthouse staff, not a judge, not even a clerk, just a woman with entitlement thick enough to believe she could police someone else's existence. I saw your daughter walk earlier, the woman added sharply. So maybe this whole wheelchair act is a little dramatic. Not saying she's lying, but it's hard to tell these days. Some kids learn it from their parents. How to game the system. Melissa felt her throat go dry. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the courthouse, the paperwork, the reason they came. All she saw was her child being dissected by someone who had never known her name, her story, or her pain. Before she could respond, the bathroom door opened. Nia emerged, rolling herself gently out, her small hands expertly maneuvering the wheels. She looked up, smiling at first, proud of herself for managing independently. Then she froze. The woman was staring down at her, lips curled, arms still folded. She stepped forward and stood directly in front of the chair, blocking the path. And where do you think you're going, young lady? Melissa stepped forward like lightning, placing herself between them. Back off. I'm just asking a question, the woman replied with mock innocence. This child should not be left unattended in secure spaces. We don't know who she is, or what she's capable of. She's 8 years old. Melissa was shaking now, and she's my daughter. And if you touch her chair again, I swear to God. A security guard rounded the corner. The woman raised her hand quickly, like she'd summoned him with the sheer force of her entitlement. Officer, she called. Over here, please. We've got a situation. The guard, a young man in his late 20s, walked over already wary. What's going on? This woman, the Karen began, gesturing toward Melissa with a dramatic sigh, brought a child into a restricted area and used the accessible bathroom. I've asked nicely for clarification, but now they're being aggressive, disruptive. Melissa's voice was low and trembling. We haven't been aggressive. We used the bathroom. That's it. The guard looked at Nia, then back at the woman. Ma'am, I don't see any issue here. This is a public floor. The accessible bathroom is for anyone who needs it. Karen clicked her tongue. Well, how was I supposed to know? I saw her moving just fine earlier, and I've worked in disability services. I know how the real ones look. This, she pointed at Nia's legs, this doesn't seem legitimate. Nia shrank into her chair, her eyes starting to glisten. Don't look at her, Melissa said, stepping in front again. Look at me. You don't get to speak to her. You don't get to question her diagnosis. You don't get to decide who qualifies for dignity. Karen didn't back down. In fact, she pulled out her phone again, and this time dialed with visible determination. I'm calling 911, she announced. This needs to be officially reported. For documentation. For safety. You're calling 911, Melissa repeated, stunned. Because a disabled child used the restroom? No, Karen replied, smirking. Because a disruptive parent is escalating a situation in a government building. The security guard stepped in. Ma'am, please, there's no need for that. You're creating the disturbance here. But it didn't matter. The phone was already ringing. And once again, in the middle of a place meant to uphold justice, Melissa found herself and her child cast as the threat. All because someone saw a wheelchair and decided it was a performance. All because someone saw a black mother and decided she didn't belong. Nia's voice was barely audible. Mommy, I'm scared. Melissa knelt beside her. It's okay, baby. We didn't do anything wrong. But even as she said it, she knew. In the eyes of women like this, armed with judgment, false authority, and a phone, right and wrong didn't matter. Only power did. And Karen had decided that today, power belonged to her. The call connected. Karen turned slightly away, lowering her voice into that artificial tone of polite concern that disguises cruelty beneath civility. Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance, she said calmly. I'm at the county courthouse. There's a woman here very agitated, and her child. Well, they're unsupervised, using restricted facilities. The mother's becoming aggressive with me and with courthouse staff. Yes, I feel unsafe. Melissa couldn't believe what she was hearing. She stood frozen, her mind racing to keep up. Aggressive? Unsupervised? Unsafe? What was unsafe was a grown woman interrogating a disabled child and calling the police for no reason. What was unsafe was a system that gave people like this woman the benefit of the doubt, while forcing women like Melissa to prove over and over that they belonged in public spaces with dignity. Nia was holding her mother's hand tightly now, her lower lip trembling. Melissa bent down, brushing a hand across her daughter's curls. "It's okay, baby. Just breathe. I've got you." But the hallway wasn't quiet anymore. People were gathering now. The sound of a 911 call had drawn attention. A few bystanders stood at a distance, pretending not to stare, but very much listening. A courthouse clerk peeked from behind the frosted glass of her window. Another security guard walked over from the far end of the corridor, eyes scanning the scene. Karen ended the call and looked smug, as if she'd won something. "They're sending someone," she said, addressing no one in particular. "For everyone's safety." "Everyone's safety?" Melissa said sharply. "You mean your comfort? Because nothing here has been unsafe, except your entitlement." Karen tilted her head and offered a cold smile. "Ma'am, I'm not your enemy. I simply observed something that didn't look right. I have every right to report that." "You have the right to report," Melissa replied, her voice shaking with fury. "But you don't have the right to humiliate a child. You don't have the right to accuse someone of faking a disability. And you certainly don't have the right to weaponize 911 because you felt inconvenienced." The second security guard stepped closer now. "Can someone tell me exactly what's going on here?" The first guard, still standing by, shook his head. "The child used the accessible restroom. This woman here," he motioned toward Karen, "felt that was inappropriate and decided to call 911. Karen crossed her arms. "I observed suspicious behavior and acted accordingly." "Sitting in a wheelchair?" Melissa snapped. "Using a bathroom labeled for her? That's your definition of suspicious." By now, the hallway had become something of a stage. Phones were out. People were recording. A courthouse employee whispered something into her walkie-talkie. The quiet dignity of Melissa's morning had unraveled into a public trial without a courtroom. And her daughter, so small in her chair, so quiet, so scared, was at the center of it. The elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped out. Melissa felt her stomach twist. They moved with calm purpose, eyes scanning quickly as they approached. "We received a call about a disturbance involving a child," one of them asked. Karen immediately stepped forward, her posture straight and practiced. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for coming. I witnessed a woman bringing a child into a government building and using a restricted access bathroom without proper supervision. When I tried to intervene, she became verbally aggressive. Several courthouse employees were present." The officer turned to Melissa. "Ma'am, what's your version of events?" Melissa breathed in, deep, steady. "My daughter needed to use the restroom. She's disabled. That restroom is accessible. I stood outside while she used it. This woman confronted me, questioned my daughter's disability, blocked her path when she exited, and called you. All while we were simply trying to attend a legal appointment." The other officer looked down at Nia, then knelt slightly. "Hey there," he said softly. "You okay?" Nia nodded slowly, still clutching her mother's hand. "I just had a pee," she whispered. The silence that followed was deafening. One of the officers stood upright, turning to Karen. "Ma'am, there's no law against a disabled child using an accessible bathroom. There's also no law that allows you to question or detain them." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Unless there's more to this," the officer continued, "we won't be filing any report. But I'd advise you not to interfere with individuals in a public building without cause. Misusing emergency services can lead to consequences." Karen blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected to be on the receiving end of a warning. The officers turned to Melissa. "Ma'am, we're sorry this happened. You and your daughter are free to continue your day." Melissa gave a tight, grateful nod. "Thank you." As the officers walked away, the tension in the hallway began to dissolve, but not disappear. Karen stood awkwardly, clearly unsure of what to do next. A few bystanders muttered among themselves. One woman came over and gently placed a hand on Melissa's shoulder. I saw everything, she whispered. You handled that with so much grace. I'm so sorry. Melissa didn't respond. Not yet. Her focus was entirely on Nia, who had sunk quietly into her lap now, overwhelmed. She pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. I'm proud of you, she whispered. You were so strong. Nia didn't speak. She didn't need to. The worst had passed, but its shadow would linger. And somewhere deep in Melissa's heart, a quiet resolve began to bloom. This story would not end here. Not in that hallway. Not with shame. It would be told, and people would listen. The hallway slowly returned to its routine rhythm. People went back to their benches, guards resumed their posts, and clerks retreated into offices. But the air still carried the weight of what had just occurred, a weight Melissa could feel with every step as she wheeled Nia gently down the corridor toward the clerk's office. Neither of them spoke. Nia's eyes were still glassy, her fingers lightly tapping the armrest of her chair, her coping rhythm, the one she used when she was overwhelmed but trying not to cry. Melissa didn't interrupt it. She knew her daughter too well. She knew that silence was how Nia processed pain, just like Melissa's strength often hit her own. At the clerk's window, the woman behind the glass looked up, recognition dawning in her expression. Ms. Campbell? Yes, Melissa said, quietly, adjusting the folder of documents in her arms. I saw what happened, the clerk said gently, leaning in. I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have had to go through that. Your daughter, she handled herself with such dignity. Melissa gave a faint, tired smile. Thank you. She gets that from my mother. The woman reached under the counter and pulled out the forms Melissa needed to submit. You're all set. The judge will review your application this afternoon. But if you're willing, I'd like to let Judge Harris know what happened. Melissa hesitated. Why? Because he's passionate about disability rights, and because he was in chambers. He heard some of it. He asked us to let him know who was involved. She lowered her voice. He wasn't happy. Melissa considered for a long moment, then nodded. All right. They moved into the waiting area just outside Judge Harris's courtroom, where a staff member came out and quietly ushered them in through a side door. The room was simple hardwood floors, bookshelves, large windows letting in light. The judge sat behind a long desk, glasses perched on his nose, silver hair neatly combed back. Miss Campbell, he said, standing as they entered. And you must be Nia. Nia blinked, shy but curious. Come on in. Sit wherever you're comfortable. Melissa wheeled Nia forward and sat beside her. The judge remained standing for a moment, almost as if out of respect, before he began to speak. I want to apologize, he said. You came here today for something important, and instead you were made to feel like you didn't belong. That's unacceptable in this building or anywhere else. Melissa nodded slowly. Thank you, Your Honor. We didn't come looking for trouble. We just needed the restroom. I know, and you are well within your rights. I also know you're here to finalize enrollment into a specialized education program. I've read your file, and I have to say I'm impressed. Nia has excellent academic progress, despite all the challenges she's faced. Melissa smiled at her daughter, who was now fidgeting with the zipper on her jacket, clearly embarrassed by all the attention. Judge Harris continued, I'd like to move your paperwork to the top of today's docket. In fact, I'm prepared to approve it now. Melissa blinked. You can do that. He smiled. I'm the judge. I think I can manage a little efficiency. The tension that had gripped her chest all morning finally began to ease. Melissa exhaled deeply, a quiet sigh of relief. Thank you. This means everything. It's the least I can do, he said. And one more thing, I'll be submitting an internal report about what happened. Not just because of the behavior of the individual who confronted you, but because this courthouse needs better training on how to serve people with disabilities and how to protect them from harassment. Melissa's eyes welled with tears. Finally, someone got it. Not just the moment, but the pattern, the way discrimination dressed itself in politeness, in policies, in concerns. The way it was never just one moment, but a lifetime of moments that told people like her they were unwelcome in spaces others moved through freely. I appreciate that, she said, her voice thick. We just want to live with dignity. We don't want special treatment. We want fair treatment. The judge nodded. That's exactly what you deserve. They left the courtroom quietly, but with a new sense of peace. The paperwork was submitted. The approval was given. The courthouse had witnessed a moment of injustice, but for once, someone had stood up and spoken the truth. As they wheeled back toward the exit, Melissa saw Karen in the distance, now speaking to someone at the front desk, looking flustered, her confidence clearly shaken. She didn't stop. She didn't speak. She didn't even look directly at her. Some things, she thought, don't deserve your energy. But as they passed the door where it had all begun, the accessible restroom, Nia tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mommy? Yes, baby. Next time, if someone says I don't belong, can I still go in anyway? Melissa stopped walking, bent down, and held her daughter's face in her hands. You always go in, she said softly, because you belong anywhere love, respect, and courage exist. And you carry all three. Nia nodded slowly, her lips curling into the faintest smile. Melissa stood up tall, her hand steady on the wheelchair. And, together, they pushed forward. The courthouse faded behind them as Melissa wheeled Nia toward the parking lot, sunlight warming their backs. But even as the day moved forward, her heart couldn't let go of everything that had happened. The woman, the humiliation, the fear, it had all cut deep, deeper than most people would ever understand. Because it wasn't the first time. It had started early, long before Nia ever knew the world could be unfair. Melissa remembered the first time she heard the word spina bifida. Nia was still in her belly, a tiny heartbeat on a monitor. The doctor had spoken gently, but even gentle words can carry devastation. There would be challenges, surgeries, maybe lifelong disabilities. Some babies didn't make it. Melissa had sat in her car in the hospital parking lot for hours that day, trying to breathe, trying to pray, trying to be strong. Everyone told her it would be easier to terminate. You're young, they said. You'll have more children. But she already had a child, Nia, growing inside her, kicking at her ribs, reacting to music, holding on. So she fought. Melissa worked 2 jobs during pregnancy. She attended therapy classes. She researched everything about adaptive parenting, disability laws, support networks. She learned how to advocate long before Nia could speak. By the time Nia arrived, tiny, fragile, but fierce, Melissa was ready. Ready to be her mother, her protector, her champion. But love wasn't always enough to shield them. Melissa had watched Nia be excluded from playground games because other kids didn't know how to include someone in a chair. She had heard teachers use words like burden or special case when referring to her daughter's accommodations. She'd fought with schools over ramps, elevators that didn't work, and aides who never showed up. There was always some excuse, some delay, some reminder that her daughter needed to ask or beg for what others took for granted. And yet, through it all, Nia smiled. She asked questions. She painted rainbows on rainy days. She learned to transfer from her chair to the couch by herself at age 6 and cried when she finally did it. Not from pain, from pride. She never saw herself as broken. That was something the world projected onto her. Melissa also remembered the stairs, at the grocery store, at the airport, in waiting rooms, people pretending not to look, but watching anyway. Some even approached her with condescending sympathy, as if Nia's existence was a tragedy. Once, a stranger handed her $20 just to help out, assuming disability meant poverty. Melissa handed it back with a thank you and a smile that masked years of anger. But nothing compared to the moment Nia came home crying from her first school field trip. They put me on the helper van, she'd said, not with my friends. I asked why, and they said it's easier. But I don't want to be easier. I want to be with them. Melissa had tucked her in that night and sat by the door for hours, crying silently, not because Nia had been separated, but because she had learned the word different, not in a book, but in her bones. And still they rose. Every day. Nia went to therapy 3 times a week. Melissa drove 45 minutes to a clinic on the other side of town because it had the best pediatric neurologist. She gave up dating, parties, and social outings for years, not because she had to, but because nothing felt more important than her daughter's fight. They celebrated everything. The first time Nia wheeled herself across the living room without help. The first time she stood with braces for more than 10 seconds. The first time she spoke up in class. The first time she asked, "Mommy, can I tell people about my disability instead of you doing it for me?" Melissa had smiled through tears and said yes, because that too was progress. So, when a stranger like Karen looked at her daughter and saw only weakness, manipulation, or inconvenience, it wasn't just about that moment in the courthouse. It was about every moment that had come before it, every fight, every delay, every time the world asked her and her daughter to explain their right to exist, just a little louder, just a little more politely. But the world didn't know the whole story. It didn't know that Nia had survived surgery at 2 days old, that she had taught herself to draw with both hands in case one stopped working, that she once saved her own therapy notes so she could help other kids one day. The world didn't know Melissa had turned every rejection into fuel, that she was now part of 3 advocacy boards, had written op-eds on accessibility, and mentored new mothers of children with disabilities every weekend. The world had no idea who they were, but it would, because Melissa was done asking to be seen. And Nia? She was just getting started. By the next morning, the courthouse incident wasn't just a painful memory, it was a headline. Someone in the hallway had recorded the entire confrontation. From the moment Karen blocked Nia's path to the arrival of the police, every word, every expression, every injustice was now immortalized in pixels. The video, shaky but clear, had been uploaded to social media that night under the caption, "White woman calls 911 on disabled black girl using accessible bathroom in courthouse. It took less than 12 hours to go viral." By sunrise, it had already reached 2 million views on TikTok. A thread on Twitter was gaining momentum, breaking down the incident moment by moment, analyzing the racism, the ableism, the entitlement, all of it. Activists, disability advocates, and civil rights organizations began to repost it. Hashtags like hashtag #LetNiaP, hashtag accessibility is a right, and hashtag Black Disabled Lives Matter were trending by noon. Melissa didn't know it had happened until her phone buzzed awake with hundreds of notifications. Friends were texting. A local news station had emailed. Her inbox was flooded with subject lines like "Media Inquiry Courthouse Incident and we stand with you." She blinked at the screen in disbelief. Nia was still asleep in the next room, her favorite stuffed bear tucked under her chin. Melissa walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared at her phone as if it were speaking another language. She had wanted visibility, but not like this. Not through trauma. Not at the cost of her daughter's privacy. But part of her also knew the story was already out there. And, for once, people were listening. The first reporter arrived on her doorstep by 2 p.m., Melissa declined. The second one called her sister. The third one, a black woman journalist from a respected outlet, emailed Melissa personally with a message that said, "I'm a mother too. You don't owe anyone a story. But if you want the truth told with care, I'll listen." That was the first interview Melissa agreed to. She and Nia appeared in silhouette, their voices slightly altered to protect Nia's identity. But what they said hit hard. Melissa spoke about years of silent discrimination, subtle insults, overlooked needs. Nia, in her small and honest voice, said, "I just wanted to use the bathroom by myself. That's all." The clip aired on national TV the next night. Suddenly, Melissa's phone wasn't just buzzing, it was burning. Offers flooded in. Nonprofits wanted to collaborate, lawyers offering pro bono support, podcast invitations, community leaders asking if Melissa would speak at their next event. Schools reached out, requesting disability awareness training. A senator tweeted in support. The mayor's office sent an apology, and offered a sit-down meeting about improving accessibility protocols in public buildings. But it wasn't all support. Some messages were filled with hatred. Anonymous emails accused her of staging the entire thing for clout. Comments on the video said she was training her daughter to be a victim. Some called it fake news. Others accused Melissa of using the race card. Melissa deleted the worst of them, but she kept a message from a woman in another state who said, "My son has cerebral palsy. We've been through this too. Thank you for not staying silent." That made everything feel worth it. And then there was Karen. Her name was leaked online within days. Her workplace identified, her position exposed. The company released a statement distancing themselves from her actions and placing her on indefinite leave. Within 48 hours, she was fired. Some said it was justice. Others said it was cancel culture. Melissa said nothing publicly. Privately, she told a friend, "I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted people to understand that my daughter shouldn't have to earn respect. She should be given it by default." In the midst of the chaos, Melissa made one decision that would shape everything that followed. She started a foundation. She called it Nia's Way. Its mission was simple: to fight for accessibility, representation, and dignity for disabled children of color. Within weeks, the website was up. A designer offered free branding. A lawyer helped register the nonprofit. Volunteers signed up. Donations poured in. Melissa used the money to start small, printing educational pamphlets for schools, building care packages for families dealing with long hospital stays, hosting online webinars for teachers. But she had bigger plans: curriculum reform, accessibility audits, and a podcast hosted by disabled youth. And Nia? Nia blossomed. She became known as the bathroom girl in some circles, a nickname she didn't love, but one she learned to own. Her classmates rallied around her. Her teachers gave her more space to speak up. One day she came home from school with a crayon drawing of a courthouse and a little girl in a wheelchair holding a superhero cape. "I made this in art class," she said. "That's me. And that's the bathroom. And that's mommy stopping the bad lady." Melissa hung it on the fridge with quiet pride. Despite everything, or maybe because of everything, a moment of pain had bloomed into purpose. The world had seen Nia, and this time it didn't look away. Melissa sat at her kitchen table late one night, laptop open, Nia asleep in the next room. The house was quiet, but her mind wasn't. Emails kept flooding in, stories from mothers, teachers, therapists, young adults in wheelchairs, Black parents tired of being dismissed, veterans turned disability advocates, queer activists fighting for intersectional inclusion. Every message carried one common thread: "I've been there too." It hit her then: what happened at the courthouse wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just one woman's ignorance or a bad day. It was the symptom of a bigger disease, one that weaves its way into public policy, architecture, education, customer service, and policing. One that labels difference as disorder and treats accessibility like a privilege rather than a human right. Melissa had always known in her bones that the world wasn't built for people like Nia. But now the world was watching. The courthouse moment had exposed not just a personal act of cruelty, but a cultural failure. It was a mirror reflecting back the quiet indignities that disabled people of color face every day, often when no one's recording. Like the mother in Ohio whose autistic son was handcuffed at school for noncompliance. Like the boy in Alabama denied an accessible desk and forced to work on the floor. Like the veteran in New York who couldn't enter a voting station because the ramp was locked. These stories didn't go viral, but they happened, over and over again. Melissa thought of how Karen had weaponized the system so easily. One phone call, dripping with coded language, unsupervised, aggressive, unsafe, and police were summoned. All it took was a few buzzwords that America had learned to fear when spoken about Black bodies. And even though justice had prevailed that day, it could have gone differently. So many times, it has gone differently. Melissa couldn't stop thinking, what if the security guard had sided with Karen? What if the officers had come in ready to believe her? What if there had been no cameras? What if they didn't walk away safely? That's what systemic bias looks like. It isn't always loud. It's quiet. It wears a smile. It hides behind concern and policy and just doing my job. It's Karen calling 911 on a child in a wheelchair for using the bathroom and believing she's the hero in the story. And it's exhausting. Black parents of disabled children live in constant negotiation with the world. They must teach their kids not just how to use their equipment or advocate for their IEPs or navigate a playground, but also how to shrink themselves in public, to avoid being seen as a threat, to soften their voices, downplay their needs, and say thank you for the bare minimum of decency. Melissa had done that dance for years. But she was done. Through Nia's way, she started speaking on panels, writing op-eds, holding conversations with school boards and courthouse staff. She wasn't interested in shame or punishment. She wanted change. She spoke about the need to reframe disability, not as something to pity, but as a natural part of human diversity. She challenged people to notice how accessible often meant barely functional. One elevator tucked in the back corner. One bathroom with a door too heavy for a child to open alone. No ramps to the stage. No space at the table. She asked, what message are we sending when children like Nia are always told, you can be here, but only if it doesn't inconvenience us? And then she said the words that stopped every room cold. I don't want her sympathy. I want your restructuring. It wasn't just about buildings. It was about culture, curriculum, attitudes. Why weren't children being taught about disability in the same way they learned about diversity and inclusion? Why weren't accessible features part of the original design instead of being added later? Why were so many disabled voices missing from policy rooms where decisions about their lives were being made? People started listening, slowly, uneasily, but they listened. And Nia? She began asking her own questions too. Why don't all parks have rubber ground instead of wood chips? Why can't I be the main character in a cartoon? Why do adults talk to me like I'm a baby just because I'm in a chair? The bigger issue wasn't just Karen. It was the fact that Karen thought she was right, that somewhere along the way, society had taught her she could be the gatekeeper of bathrooms, dignity, belonging. It had given her that power and taught Nia to be quiet in the face of it. Not anymore. Melissa realized the work ahead would take years, maybe decades, but the seed had been planted. In courthouse hallways, in living rooms, watching the viral clip, in classrooms, now discussing accessibility, in the hearts of those who saw Nia, truly saw her, and realized she belonged. This wasn't just a story, it was a reckoning. And the question now was not what happened to Nia, it was what are we doing to make sure it never happens again? Weeks had passed, but the fire hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. Melissa walked into the community center one sunny afternoon, holding Nia's hand. The room buzzed with quiet energy, a circle of folding chairs, a table with juice boxes and crayons, volunteers setting up a banner that read, Nia's Way. Inclusion starts here. It wasn't a rally. It wasn't a press event. It was something far more powerful, a gathering of families, mothers and fathers with kids in braces, wheelchairs, walkers, children with speech delays, autism, limb differences, all of them smiling, some shy, some curious, all of them home in this space. Melissa stepped to the front and looked around. Her heart swelled. What began as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a movement of hope. Hi, everyone, she began, her voice steady. Thank you for being here. And thank you for reminding me that we don't have to ask for space, we can build it. Nia sat beside her, spinning the wheels of her chair slowly, looking up at her mom with quiet pride. Melissa continued, we've been told our kids need to adapt, that we need to be patient, that we should accept less and be grateful for it. But look at them, she motioned toward the kids now coloring a giant poster together, one of them helping another tape it to the wall. They're already doing what the world refuses to, seeing each other, accepting difference, leading with kindness. Applause rippled softly through the room. Later, as families mingled and shared stories, a small boy rolled over to Nia with his toy robot and said, "Want a race?" Nia giggled, lifted her wheels, and grinned. Only if you think you can keep up. They dashed, or rather, rolled, down the hallway, leaving their parents laughing and cheering behind them. Melissa stood in the doorway, watching them disappear into laughter. She thought back to that moment in the courthouse, the judgment, the fear, the cold stare of a woman who thought herself a guardian of order. Melissa had stood her ground that day not because she was fearless, but because she was done being afraid. And now she was building something permanent. She'd hired a small team to grow the foundation. They were developing school toolkits, teacher trainings, even a comic book series featuring a black disabled heroine based on Nia, complete with a power chair that flew and a voice that moved mountains. But more than the projects, Melissa focused on the people. Every child mattered. Every parent deserved support. And every space needed redesigning, not just the physical ones, but the emotional ones too. Meanwhile, the media buzz slowly faded. The viral video stopped trending. Karen disappeared from a news cycle. Some new controversy replaced the headlines. But that was okay. Melissa didn't need the spotlight. She needed the work to keep going. And in the quiet moments when the cameras were gone, when the hall was empty, she reminded herself why it all mattered. One night, after a long day of planning, she sat beside Nia on the couch. The lights were low, a movie playing in the background, their favorite blanket stretched over their legs. Nia leaned her head on Melissa's shoulder and whispered, "Mommy, am I still the girl from the video?" Melissa smiled. "You'll always be the girl who changed things. But you're also the girl who loves purple and pancakes and glitter, and who wants a puppy even though I keep saying no." Nia giggled. "You'll say yes someday. We'll see." Then Nia turned serious. "Do you think I made people mad? The woman who yelled, the people who saw it online?" Melissa looked into her daughter's eyes. "Some people will always be mad when the world changes, but that's okay. You didn't make them mad. You made them see. That's braver than most people ever get to be." There was a long pause. Then Nia said, "One day, I want to tell the whole story, from the beginning." Melissa kissed her forehead. "You will. And when you do, they'll listen. Because how could they not?" She was proof that strength comes in all sizes, that courage rolls forward even when the road isn't smooth, that sometimes the smallest voices hold the biggest truths. And maybe, just maybe, one child using a bathroom in peace would no longer be a revolutionary act. Maybe one day it would just be normal. Until then, Melissa and Nia would keep going. One step, one wheel, one story at a time.